The following lecture applies some of the terminology defined in the Literary Terminology lecture to the opening soliloquy of Richard III in order to provide examples of the various terms in action. Please note that the analysis presented here is dense for the purposes of understanding the terminology. In your own eventual analysis, you might apply a term or two to a passage based on what you wanted to argue about the passage, but you wouldn't identify every term that could be applied. Spoiler alert! Please note that this lecture reveals the plot of the play. I think knowing the plot before reading the play will be useful to understanding Shakespeare's language. Shakespeare's play Richard III is a historical fiction. The protagonist is Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the most fully developed round character in the play. In this case, the protagonist is not a hero because Richard is depicted as guilty of crimes. Many of the other characters act as Richard's antagonists, including Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, who kills Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field and becomes Henry VII. The play opens with Richard's soliloquy. This soliloquy is located in Act 1, Scene 1, lines 1 through 41. The scene begins with stage directions. Enter Richard, Duke of Gloucester, alone. The soliloquy identifies the play's conflict. Richard wants power and is willing to commit crimes even against his own family to get it. The soliloquy also provides some sense of Richard's motivation. He determines to become a villain because he sees his crooked back as excluding him from human company, including romantic relationships. Based on the rest of the play, one might argue that the climax is Richard's choice to kill his nephews, which among Richard's other crimes turns his allies, including the Duke of Buckingham, against him. The resolution of the conflict occurs in Act 5, with ghostly apparitions manifesting Richard's guilt, and Richard's subsequent death on the battlefield as a kind of retribution for his crimes. The plot includes themes of insecurity, envy, revenge, and justice. Richard's soliloquy provides the time and place of the play's setting by beginning with Richard's reflections on the outcome of the Wars of the Roses to this point. The House of York has been victorious, Henry VI has been killed, and Edward IV has taken the throne. We know we are in England around 1471. So now let's use some poetic terminology. The use of the words winter and summer do not mean a literal change of season, but a movement from unhappy to happy times, with the seasons acting as metaphors for the times, comparing two unalike things. Given Richard's feeling that he is left out, some of the summer imagery here may be ironic, in that he may be expressing pleasure he doesn't feel. Notice that the first line is enjambed, that is, there's no punctuation at the line ending, and the second is end-stopped with punctuation at the end. That can affect the flow and the sound of the language, and may also represent some emphasis that's important to the meaning. The word son is a pun. Richard's brother, Edward, is this son of York, who has taken the throne. Son also implies the son of summer, and the sun on Edward's crest. The third line includes assonance, a repeated ow sound, clouds, lowered, hour, house. There's also some use of alliteration in the B sounds that occur in the following lines. The word measures means dances, but it is also a synecdoche because measures are part of written music, the part referring to the whole. One might argue for a bit of onomatopoeia in this section, as longer vowel sounds in the first part of each line give way to shorter, higher sounds, which conveys the difference in sound associated with war versus parties. There's also an instance of personification in Grim-Visaged War, which turns war into a person. You might notice there's a comma midline, which is a caesura. It's a punctuated pause within a line. Again, that may indicate emphasis for effect. There's also an I rhyme, which is a rhyme that looks like it should rhyme but doesn't, where prove and love look like they should sound the same, but they don't, at least in modern English. They may have sounded similar in Shakespeare's time. There's also some consonants in the S sounds, in the inductions and dangerous. It gives the combination of words a kind of creepy feeling, which is good for our Richard. Toward the end of the speech, there's a rhyming couplet. Remember that couplets are two lines where the ending syllables rhyme, and in this case it's a masculine rhyme because only a single syllable is part of the rhyme and its syllable is stressed. There's also an apostrophe right at the end. Richard is addressing his thoughts. He's speaking to his thoughts, and thoughts aren't human, so that's essentially what an apostrophe looks like. So the following discussion will explore Shakespeare's use of rhythm in this soliloquy. It's clear that the soliloquy is poetry rather than prose because of the line breaks, which you can see on the screen. Because a number of the lines employ irregular rhythm, it's sometimes difficult to tell that Shakespeare is using iambic pentameter. But I would argue that the basis of the rhythm is iambic pentameter, and then Shakespeare varies the rhythm for effect. In traditional scansion, the unstressed syllables would be marked with a sort of U shape over the syllable, and the stressed with an accent over the syllable. Here's an example from the Purdue Owl's discussion of scansion. The scansion also marks feet with slashes and caesuras with double lines. Since these marks are difficult to include in Word, I'm using capitals to indicate the stress. And you'll see that in the next, right here, in fact. This first example is from line 3, and it employs regular iambic pentameter with 5 feet of 2 syllables each, and the stress falling on the second syllable in each foot, right, which is an iambic pattern. And you can see the stressed syllables are in capitals and the unstressed syllables are not. And all the clouds that lowered upon our house. It's pretty easy to hear that iambic rhythm. The first line is almost regular iambic pentameter, with 5 feet of 2 syllables each, and the stress falling on the second syllable, except that the first word is stressed, which seems to emphasize the time and also the beginning of the speech, as if Richard is calling our attention, or maybe the actor on stage is calling the attention of the people in the audience. Some lines are irregular to add emphasis. In line 23, the second foot reverses the pattern to stress the bark sound that Richard is using to talk about his experiences. Some lines are irregular to communicate ironic discomfort with the current state of affairs. In lines 5 through 8, Shakespeare adds syllables which throw off the rhythm. These seem to suggest Richard's opinion about peace, that it's not quite as interesting as war. In these lines, the iambic pentameter is relatively regular except in the last foot, where Shakespeare adds extra syllables to 3 of the lines, uses feminine line endings for 3 lines, and fails to include a stressed syllable at all in line 6 at the end. These irregularities make readers or listeners uncomfortable, and perhaps that's the point. Richard is not comfortable in this new peaceful kingdom.